and welcome to lesson 12 for anatomy and physiology. Today we're going to start the muscular system. So we're really going to be talking a lot about the microscopic features of skeletal muscle in this lesson, and we're really going to get into muscle contraction. Muscle contraction is a pretty complex process. So along with this PowerPoint and this lecture, you're going to be watching a lot of videos that really demonstrate what skeletal muscle contraction looks like. So first, let's talk about the anatomy of skeletal muscle. Remember that there's three types of muscle: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. We're going to be focusing on skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle cells are huge cigar-shaped multinucleate, which means they have more than one nucleus, and are the largest of the muscle types. Skeletal muscle is also striated and voluntary, meaning that you can control it. They also can generate a lot of force, but are very fragile. So I want to focus really quickly before moving on this term right here, fiber. We usually say cells. We say like a skeletal muscle cell. I want you to know that fiber, when talking about muscle, equals cell. So fiber equals cell. So when I say a skeletal muscle fiber, I mean a skeletal muscle cell. So we're going to talk about how skeletal muscle is kind of packaged. So skeletal muscles are pretty much I like to think of it as like asparagus at a grocery store. So think for a second that you're going into a grocery store to buy some asparagus. Well, a single muscle fiber is going to be one single piece of asparagus. And surrounding that fiber is what we call the endomysium, which is a delicate connective tissue cover that covers each individual muscle fiber. A bunch of fibers or cells put together is going to equal a fascicle. So when I think about my asparagus example, this would be a bunch of asparagus put together, wrapped around that rubber band that you buy. And that rubber band would be the paramysium. So paramysium is going to be the connective tissue sheath that surrounds a fascicle. And then a bunch of fascicles bound together is going to be your entire muscle. And that's going to be covered by what we call the epimysium. An epimysium is going to be connected into tendons, which are going to attach muscle to bones. So this is our smallest up here, one fiber surrounded by the endomysium, and then we get larger into the whole muscle. So this is the largest down here. So if we look, this is how it's arranged. And I think they kind of look like bundles of asparagus. That's why I like to use that example. So here's your one muscle fiber. That is going to be surrounded by the endomysium. A bunch of muscle fibers put together is going to equal a fascicle. And fascicles are going to be surrounded by the perimysium, which is, once again, this is just connective tissue holding it all together. A bunch of fascicles put together is going to be your entire muscle, and that's going to be surrounded by what we call the epimysium. And then you can see that epimysium eventually turns into a tendon, which is going to attach muscle to bone. So remember, we're going from the smallest, which is the skeletal muscle, the fiber, all the way up to the actual big muscle, which is our largest. So now let's talk about what our skeletal system does for us. Well, the big one is movement. And when we talk about movement, we automatically think of walking or running and using our skeletal muscle. But remember that we have these three types of muscle here. Skeletal muscle is the one we think of most when we look at movement, but we also have cardiac muscle found in the heart that's going to cause muscle contraction in the heart, so your heart beating. You also have smooth muscle that's going to be found through your entire digestive tract that's going to help move food from organ to organ. Here's just an overview of all your skeletal muscles, and I just wanted to show you, these are two people obviously going for a jog, and really movement is kind of our big thing that we're going to be talking about here. Maintaining posture. The skeletal muscle is very important for keeping you upright. You actually have a group of muscles here, okay, that are going to help basically keep you upright. And we take this for granted a little bit. We don't really ever think about these muscles helping us defy gravity, but it doesn't matter what we're doing, if we're standing or sitting. They're constantly making tiny adjustments to help us contain and maintain an erect posture. Stabilizing joints. Tendons are really important for stabilizing joints. For example, you have your rotator cuffs. If you're any sort of athlete, especially with baseball or softball, you've heard of rotator cuffs. The rotator cuffs are actually 4 muscles that surround your shoulder joint, and they really help keep your shoulder joint in place. Generating heat. Okay, we've all been cold. We've all shivered. Shivering is actually contraction of the skeletal muscle to help you generate heat. So a lot of times when you contract muscles, a lot of it is lost as heat. So you can produce a lot of heat when contracting muscles. So for example, you're very, very cold. Your body temperature drops. You start to shiver. The skeletal muscle contracting, causing you to shiver, is going to produce heat. So next time you are out in the cold and you start to shiver or your teeth start to shatter, that's your body trying to maintain a stable body temperature. So now we're going to get into the details of skeletal muscle. And this is where we start to throw a lot of terms at you. So make sure that you're filling in your notes, you're going back, you're watching this again, you're doing all your assignments, and you should be able to get this pretty easily. But it definitely is a lot of information, so make sure you're taking it one step at a time. So remember that skeletal muscles are going to be multinucleate, meaning more than one nucleus. And they're going to be right underneath what we call the sarcolemma. The sarcolemma is a special plasma membrane only found in muscle cells. So if you look over here, you can see here's a nucleus, and what you'll notice is the nuclei of skeletal muscle cells and muscle cells are pushed up against the edge of the sarcolemma. They're not found in the middle. They're really pushed up against the end of it because there's a lot of stuff going on inside these cells. There's a lot of proteins that are causing contraction. And nuclei are pushed aside by what we call myofibrils. And myofibrils are going to be light or dark bands, or I or A bands. So if you look at this picture, an A band is going to be dark and an I band is going to be light. So it gives muscles that very striated or striped appearance. So if we look here, here's our entire muscle as a whole, okay? Muscle fiber, one cell. Here's our nuclei pushed up against the sarcolemma. You can see they've showed the sarcolemma kind of being pulled back right here, and there's multinuclei around. And then in each individual muscle fiber, we have what's called a myofibril. So they're kind of rod-like units. And these myofibril create that striped appearance. So we have the dark A band and the light A band. So going even further in now and even more microscopic, we have what are called sarcomeres. So myofibrils have these little tiny chains of tiny contractile units called sarcomeres. And boy, oh boy, if I can tell you this is an important term, this is an important term, a sarcomere. A sarcomere is the contractile unit of a muscle cell. It is extremely important to know that term. And these little contractile units line up end to end on these myofibrils. And they have a few little components that we need to talk about. The Z disc is where one sarcomere starts and another one ends. So they're connected through these Z discs. The H zone is going to be the center zone of the sarcomere, and then the M line is going to be the center line of the H zone. So let's kind of get into this a little bit deeper. So once again, we've already seen this picture. Here's our one skeletal muscle fiber. We zoom in. There's hundreds of these little rod-like units called a myofibril. When we zoom in on the myofibril, we start to see the sarcomeres. Sarcomeres are going to start at the Z disc. So from Z disc to Z disc, this is one sarcomere. So right here, this is one sarcomere, one. And then here's another one here. And then you'd have a Z disc over here, and then that would be ending. So from Z disc to Z disc is one sarcomere. The H zone that we talked about is going to be this zone in the center. And then the M line is going to be the very center of that H zone. So here's a close-up now of that sarcomere, so you can see it a little bit better. So you have Z disc to Z disc, and remember this is on a myofibril now, is one sarcomere here, okay? The H zone is going to be in the center, and then the M line is going to be in the very center of that. And over here you can see that they're talking about actin and myosin. Actin and myosin are the two proteins that are going to cause the muscle contraction to happen. So we're going to get into that next. So on your sarcomeres, you have two very important proteins, myosin and actin. And they're a little bit different, and they do different things, so we're going to get into it. Right now, you need to know that myosin are called thick filaments. Myosin is what's going to actually use ATP for energy to cause your muscle contraction. These make up the dark band of your myofibrils when you're looking. They're very smooth, but they have these little heads coming out of them that create what we call a cross bridge. The other type of protein is called an actin protein. These are going to be your thin filaments. These are attached to the Z discs and make up the light band on your myofibrils. When contraction occurs, the myosin and actin actually slide past each other, and the actin filaments go towards the center of that H zone, causing it to disappear. So this is a super, super close-up of these filaments. So let's say right here is our H zone. Okay, there's our H zone. And we'll say that this is a Z disc over here, this is a Z disc over here, and it would span the whole thing. So what happens is you have these thick filaments, these myosin, this is a myosin, okay, this is an actin. You can see the myosin have all these heads sticking off of it. And what these heads do is they attach on to actin. So they find it. They use ATP and they attach on to actin. And what they do, and these ones would be attaching over here, what they do is they push the actin towards each other. So what happens is during contraction, you actually get a smaller H zone because the actin filaments are sliding closer together. So we're going to go ahead and pause there. Go ahead and watch video 2, and we'll continue to talk about muscle contraction.